Hey guys, I got a question about how I open in Mists in 5.04. And so I made you a little timeline here that we're going to discuss really quick about what the pull will look like and what cooldowns you should be using. So at the bottom you see a timeline with some time markers 0, 1, 2.5 and so on, and these are the abilities that I use. What you see above that are the abilities that are going to be active throughout that period. So essentially what happens is when you pull, right before the pull you should pop a potion. Vimrin's Bite is the potion that we're going to be using. Now I show the potential of using Unleash Elements and Flame Shock, preferably in that order, on the pull. Typically the reason is that the tank runs in first, you run after. And so we don't have any charges or any kind of instant ways to close the gap. So instead what we have is the ability to cast things at range. So while the other players, warriors, feral druids and things of that type who have gap closers will pounce on the boss instantly, we have some time to drop down some of our ranged abilities. So you cast Unleash Elements and Flame Shock, that's 2 GCDs. It shouldn't really take you more than 3 seconds to run into the boss. The point is here that with Vimrin's Bite you're going to lose a few seconds while you run in. There's no avoiding that, it's just the way it's going to be. So the timeline for Vimrin's Bite is going to vary, but ideally you want to have it up for your major cooldowns. Your major cooldowns are listed above. So essentially, if you read this graph from left to right, what you see is the first thing you ought to drop after you actually get sort of into range, while you are running in. At some point before you begin your rotation, the very first thing you should do is drop your Fire Elemental, unless there's a specific burn phase that you're saving it for. And the thing you have to keep in mind is Fire Elemental Totem is on a 5-minute cooldown. So if that burn phase happens to be 5 minutes into the future, you are going to gain a lot of DPS by using Fire Elemental on cooldown. So generally speaking, Fire Elemental goes down immediately, followed by Feral Spirit. This one is actually something I usually don't do. I usually don't drop Feral Spirit, although ideally you should. Feral Spirit's damage has been tripled since Cataclysm, so it's still not a great damage cooldown, but the reason you want to pop it immediately is because it has the longest duration aside from Fire Elemental Totem. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you don't use a GCD to drop Feral Spirit while your other more important cooldowns are up, namely Ascendance, your Unused Trinket, and Stormlash, and so on. So using that GCD first and getting it out of the way means the Feral Spirit will be up throughout all of your other buffs. The thing about pets and guardians in this expansion is that unlike previously where you had to buff first and then drop your stuff, you can drop your stuff first, and as your stats increase, your pets will also dynamically increase as well. So that means that if you pop Feral Spirit followed by a trinket, for example, that increases your agility, your Feral Spirits will pick up on that attack power, even if they've already spawned. And the same is true for your Fire Elemental Totem. So what you want to do is you want to put those that have a long time duration out first. Now, after you get Feral Spirits out, I show Blood Fury, Unused Trinket, and Ascendance. The reason that I show all three of those at the same time is because they are not on the global cooldown. None of those three abilities issue a global cooldown. So, theoretically, you can macro Ascendance, your Trinket, and Blood Fury together. The reason that I don't do that personally is because they have different cooldowns, and, for example, the Unused Trinket is going to vary wildly. You might not even have one. The Unused Trinket that I use currently is the Flashing Steel Talisman, which gives you about, I think it's a little bit more agility than a potion actually, so it's really, really powerful. So that only has a 90-second cooldown. Ascendance has a 3-minute cooldown. Blood Fury has a 2-minute cooldown. So because these have wildly different cooldowns, trying to macro them together is a mistake. What you can do is you can create a macro where the first cast is Ascendance, the second cast is your Unused Trinket, and the third cast is Blood Fury. So what that allows you to do is spam one button. So if you're going to pop Ascendance at the start of the fight, you can mash Ascendance and those two. Generally speaking, you should always try to put all your cooldowns to line up with Ascendance, because Ascendance is basically a large portion of our damage. Using Ascendance at a smart time in conjunction with other cooldowns is how you achieve maximum DPS as an Enhancement Shaman, at least in this tier. So if you macro Ascendance first followed by your cooldowns, it means that if those cooldowns are available, then spamming your Ascendance key will trigger them, and you really want to be doing that. one other thing I want to point out is you'll notice if you look at the timeline here at the bottom, you have Fire Elemental at 0, Feral Spirit at 1, then you have Storm Strike at 2.5, and then you have that icon you probably don't even recognize, but that's the Storm Blast icon, or Storm Lash icon, whichever it is. That's the Ascendance version of Storm Strike. The thing is that Storm Strike and the Ascendance version of Storm Strike are not on the same cooldown. So what this means is that if you hit a Storm Strike and then shift into Ascendance and then cast the Ascendance version of Storm Strike, you can basically get 2 Storm Strikes back to back. I believe also that you could theoretically macro the Ascendance Storm Strike onto the same key as Ascendance, so that you could just double tap your Ascendance key and then pop an instant Storm Strike, because I believe popping Ascendance is not on the GCD, but I am not sure if it also resets your GCD. I think it does not, but one way or the other, you want to get those out as fast as possible, and essentially using Ascendance immediately following a Storm Strike is going to be important to your DPS. Storm Lash is optional. You really ought to use it most times. Using Storm Lash effectively is really difficult, especially in a 25-man raid when you have multiple shamans. Organizing the Storm Lashes, choosing when to use them, and being able to predict, will I need this 5 minutes from now at a more critical point. So like for example in Elegon, we tend not to use Storm Lash because we need to save them for the energy spark phases, and so the thing is it's not going to be up again 5 minutes from now. We had 3 shamans in our raid, so technically 2 of us could have used them at the pull, and then 1 of us could have saved it for the first energy strike slash thing phase, energy spark phase, and by the second energy spark phase, the first shaman who had used their Storm Strike or Storm Lash on the pull, it would be up again. So technically it's probably a DPS gain to use it, and you want to generally use Storm Lash in conjunction with Bloodlust, obviously, because Storm Lash has a chance to do nature damage, and I'm not even sure if that chance is 100%, but one way or the other it inflicts nature damage per strike. So if you're Bloodlusted, then clearly you're going to do a lot more damage. Ascendance, you should try to line it up with Bloodlust if you can, but remember, you pretty much have to time how many Ascendances you're going to get in a fight. For a long fight like Elegon, which is just about 10 minutes, you're going to get 3 Ascendances. You have to make sure that you use those at appropriate times. One of them can be during the Bloodlust. So, you should know ahead of time who's going to be Bloodlusting and when, and map out your Ascendances that way. Essentially, that's all there is to it. This is my opener. This is, as far as I can tell, the most effective way to open up. If anybody has any comments that places this could be improved, please leave them and I'll update as necessary, but somebody asked and this is all I do, so peace.